My last series of talks was about polarization, and that leads to the question of blasphemy, because in a very polarized situation, anyone who speaks for the other side can be accused of blasphemy. Now, I'm going to hark back to conversations I had in the early 90s, and I wrote these up to some extent in my essays, What I Did in My Holidays, the book of my collected essays. But so I'm rearranging this a little bit. But basically what I remember was giving a talk to a small group of people about Thelema, Crowleyanity. And then they asked questions. And one of the questioners said to me, "What's your opinion on blasphemy?" Well, I said, and this is quite a Thelemic point of view, a deity, a creator of the universe, whether it's a principle or a being, that can be hurt by one individual human being in this universe saying something which offends him, is not the sort of deity I'd want to worship. In other words, from an absolute point of view, what's wrong with blasphemy? It's so insignificant. Now, it reminded me of when I was a child, brought up in the country. One time I lost my penknife, and so I prayed to God that I should find my penknife again, everything like that. And I didn't find it. Now, for a country boy, losing a penknife is a bit like losing a limb. It's disastrous. And I was so angry that I went into a quiet place and I screamed and blasphemed God for taking away my penknife. And a very Christian God, he turned the other cheek, and nothing has happened. I was never punished any more than that. Now, of course, you can't really judge that. I mean, maybe I was destined to be the Prime Minister of England, or Great Britain, but maybe my punishment is for swearing at God is that I didn't become the Prime Minister. Who knows? But point is that the idea that a little boy losing his penknife and getting cross should somehow be blasted by divine wrath for being angry just seems ridiculous to me. So that's one side of it. In absolute terms, blasphemy means nothing to me. But that's only half the story, because the other half is that for some people, these ideas, these symbols, these objects are truly sacred. So that if, say, I perform an act of consecration, I take a consecrated object and I tread on it, burn it, or something like that, although I don't think that does any harm, if it's done publicly, or if a true believer witnesses that, then it's very hurtful for that true believer. So that really is what I put to the guy. I said, blasphemy is not a big issue if it's just a personal thing between you and the deity. But if it is witnessed by the faithful, then it is a very hurtful thing to do. And then I'm against it. He then said to me, "But you're in the OTO. And there is an initiation in the OTO which you have taken, in which one does an act of desecration." And I thought, oh my God, he's right. Now, to do him justice, he didn't tell the people around what that act was. He just said, you've done an act of desecration. And I said, yes, I have. And he said, okay, what about it? And I pointed out that actually we're on the level, although he's caught me out by saying that. We're on the level because that act in the OTO ritual is secret. One swears one must never tell anyone about it. It's a secret. You do it during the ritual, and also it's an accepted thing that one is not supposed to talk about these secret rituals. So I said, the fact that you have brought it up in public, it means that you have blasphemed my religion, just as it is true I've committed an act of blasphemy against your religion. So we're on the level. The question is then, how did I feel when I was asked to desecrate a holy object? And I would like to say, in terms of what I've been talking about, well, it meant nothing to me, you know. What deity would worry about me doing a naughty act? But actually, I did feel very uneasy because, although I'm a thelemite, when I was small, I went to a church school and I sang in the church choir for the princely sum of £0.50 a week. And at that level, I sort of definitely felt uneasy. So how was I able to do it? Because I remembered I remembered a story about a Tibetan monastery in the depths of winter up in the Himalayas. No, not the Himalayas, Himalayas, that's it. Where they were snowed in for months on end and had to survive on what they could store away. And it was an exceptionally long winter, and the monks were really suffering. They were cold, they were running out of firewood, and their spirits were very low. And the Lama said they need encouragement. They need something to give them cheer. So he arranged for as much as he dare of the provisions to be put together to make a small feast, and also to collect wood. For once the hall would be warm and have a lovely evening together, and that would boost their spirits and bring back their faith in life. So that's what he did, you know. Suddenly they came into the hall, beautifully warm, and there was food on the table and drink, and they had a merry time, and everyone was very happy. But of course, after a while, the fire began to die down, and they said, "What should we do? Have you got any more wood?" And the Lama said, "Yes, in the anteroom, you'll find there's some more wood stacked up." And they went to collect it. And they came out horrified. "We're burning the Buddha." You see, this monastery got its reputation for having a very famous old statue of Buddha. Pilgrims would come from miles around to visit it, because this famous big statue of Buddha. And what the Lama had done, he'd broken it up to make wood to light the fire. And they were horrified. They said, "But you're burning the Buddha." And the Lama said, "I'm not burning the Buddha. That's just a bit of painted wood." Now the message there is a message against idolatry. You see, in that ritual, the fact that I was told to desecrate a holy object was a lesson in me of overcoming idolatry. All the unease and thing that I felt was because I was harming something sacred, which meant I was forgetting that the thing itself is just an object. The sacredness is what myself and society put into it. If we go back to the time of the Protestant Revolution, when these Catholic churches, the cathedrals, were beautifully decorated, ornate, painted, and you had these beautiful statues, the Protestant soldiers were told to go in and smash the statues because all this beauty is just a lure of the devil. It's idolatry. And so, if I was one of those Protestant soldiers sent in to smash statues, and I refused to do it, I said, no, they're beautiful, they're sacred. I'd have probably been burnt at the stake for saying that. That would be the blasphemy as far as they were concerned. So similarly, in this ritual, I was having to come face to face with the fact that what is truly sacred and what is just an idol. So that's what I explained. That was how I could do it. Now, that's interesting to me when I look back at it, and as I did in the 90s, because blasphemy actually plays an important part in the OTO and Crowley's rituals and ideas. In fact, in the OTO rituals themselves, they actually incorporate blasphemy of their own ideas. Again, I won't go into detail about it, but the thing is that Thelema is prepared to blaspheme itself. Again, a real exercise, a real lesson in overcoming idolatry and getting back to what is really sacred. How I explained this in what I did in my holidays was a reference to the 3 aeons, which Crowley talks about: Aeon of Isis, Aeon of Osiris, Aeon of Horus. Now, I've spoken about this in an earlier series of talks, which I talked about the 3 aeons. So I'll just very briefly summarize. When you read the Old Testament and you come to the New Testament, you realize there's a real change of the morality of it, if you like. And this is reflected what Crowley says about the Aeon of Isis and the Aeon of Osiris. Aeon of Isis, the gods were very dogmatic, female gods that just told you what to do. And that's rather like the way you would treat an infant. If you see the infant reading for electric plug or for the hot stove, you don't give it a lecture on electricity or heat. You just say, don't touch that. And that's rather the feeling of the Old Testament. You have the 10 commandments, thou shalt not, and all that sort of thing. And there are various other books of the Bible which list all these things you can and you can't do. But the thing that struck me, and for the Abramelin operation, I was supposed to read the Bible through from beginning to end. When I got to the New Testament, was Jesus say, when people are getting ready to stone someone who committed a crime, Jesus said, let the person who has no sin throw the first stone. Now that's very interesting because that's a totally different sort of idea of immorality. Jesus wasn't saying don't throw stones or do throw stones. He was saying, if you've never committed any sin, you have the right to throw a stone. And of course, everyone has committed sins. So really what he's saying is think before you act. And that is there's a basic principle in the Aeon of Osiris. It is the idea that you have a perfect God and you try to be perfect yourself. It's the imitation of Christ, where Christ is perfection. So the question is not what is God ordering me to do, but rather what would Christ do? A perfect person, what would they do in this circumstance? And you try to follow that. Now, see, that to me is like the difference from, you go from this infant morality where, don't touch this, don't do that, you don't, to like a 10-year-old, where the parents are more likely to say something like, eat up your greens, otherwise you won't become big and strong like Daddy. Or eat up your greens because Mummy loves you very much and she's cooked it for you. Or even more so, eat up your greens because there are many people in the world, millions of people who are starving, and they would give anything to be able to eat that, and you're going to throw it away, and that's wrong. In all these sort of circumstances, it's the parents who set themselves up as perfect, and it's up to the child to try to sort of live up to that perfection. It's the imitation of Christ. But the thing is, you see, what happens next, and this is the end of Horus, is the child grows up and becomes a rebellious teenager. And this, to me, is very much the feel of the end of Horus. You know, the blasphemous chapters in the book of the law. God being angry and sort of, saying kill and maim and torture or whatever like that. Now, this is what happens when the teenager rebels. The parents get angry. There's a fight. God is dead, says Nietzsche, and says the teenager, because the teenager discovered his oh so perfect father that he'd been trying to follow is not very perfect. The daughter has found that the mother, who's been warning her about bad boys, that sort of thing, she was a bit of a hippie slut in her when she was young. This anger, and you feel cheated, and you rebel. So, to me, it sort of makes sense that this blasphemous feeling is so strong in Thelema. And I see it as actually, although it's very shocking to people the other side of the fence, it's actually an important part of the learning of Thelema. Because I would go as far as to say that until you've blasphemed a god or a principle, you don't really know it. A simple example, if you go to visit someone who's in a cult, very often you'll be struck how beautiful it is. There's all these happy people working together and saying, oh yes, we're a big happy family and all that. And you can think, well, this is rather marvellous. Why do people complain about this cult? What you need to do is also speak to the people who've left the cult. And very often you'll find that they tell a tale of being ostracized, being thrown out, being badly treated, being lied about, things like that. And so it's only when you've also looked at the blasphemy do you really know what this deity is about. And as I say, as a little child who lost his penknife, I blasphemed furiously against Jesus, and he turned the other cheek. So that told me a lot about him. Now, this relates back to the things I've been talking about when I spoke of polarization, because when a situation is extremely polarized, it really takes us down to the lowest levels of our brain, the sort of fight and flight reptile level of the brain. Now, at the lowest level, the very basic polarity, and you think back to sort of when we're lonely proto-human in a jungle, is whether the other person is a friend or an enemy. That's the only distinction that matters. Is this person a friend or is this person an enemy? Now, if you're in a really extremely polarized situation, you get down to that sort of thinking. So, in the last example I gave, where I talked about humour is a wonderful thing that can often help to dissolve a polarity or split it up, and people can end up laughing at each other. But humour also becomes demonized. Because if the joker is not on your side, it means he must be the enemy. There's no in-between position. And so that to me is why when, after Trump's inauguration, when that woman priest asked him to show Christian mercy in a Christian church on a Christian ceremony. Rather than being seen as a Christian trying to say something which was perhaps inappropriate, she was seen as an enemy. It was a sort of blasphemy, and she received death threats for that. And that's really ironical. But that's the power of blasphemy if you get down to that level of the brain that only sees friends and enemies and nothing else.